So, we all know that one person who eats pizza every night and eats potato chips for a snack every day and probably drinks a lot of soda, but they never seem to gain weight. And then there is the other people who even just think of food and you feel your jeans tighten up. This is a very confusing phenomenon that is very frustrating and feels very unfair. But it's also something that has baffled science and raises a lot of big questions. And such as, is the ability to gain weight or control how much you eat, does it come down to pure willpower, or is it something that is entirely regulated by genes and your metabolism? There is a lot of complex science when it comes to food control and the ability for certain people to control how much food they eat. So let's dig into the science of that. There is actually a lot of scientific evidence that shows that there is something known as the skinny gene. A lot of people that are naturally skinny or slim have been shown to have this genetic predisposition that prevents them from gaining weight, even if they don't eat the right foods. As a matter of fact, around 75% of these types of people technically always get this gene from somebody in their families who was already naturally skinny, and then it's able to pass on to them. But genetics don't only dictate how skinny you are, they also can dictate how fast or how well your metabolism runs. So, some people are born, for example, with a faster metabolic rate, while others just have to take a longer time for their bodies to process the food that they eat. And it's not only the amount of time that it takes for metabolism to work, it's also the amount of effort and energy that others may have to put to get the same result as another person who doesn't have to do anything. But there was also a very interesting finding that scientists discovered while they were researching this skinny gene, which was something known as non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT for short. This is the unconscious activity that your body does all day. For example, pacing or going to the refrigerator to pick up something to eat, or pacing as you answer a phone call or going up and down stairs. A lot of people who stay lean tend to perform a lot of these neat exercises a lot more than people who do not stay as lean. And that's why it's so common for people to be shocked about when you go to places like Europe and you spend your whole time eating carbs. But because you're not jumping from your car to the restaurant as you do in America, a lot of them tend to stay skinnier because you may eat all the carbs that you want to eat in the world, but if you're going to have to run after a train or after a bus, that is a neat exercise that you're unconsciously performing that would affect how your metabolism burns down the food. But that doesn't take away the fact that food for certain people can also be an addiction. And so, irrespective of whether they perform knee exercises or they have the skinny gene, for a lot of people, eating and consuming food becomes as addictive as consuming cigarettes or alcohol or hard drugs as well. And even though a lot of people want to argue that it's impossible for food to be as addictive as cocaine, but for some other people is such a real thing. For example, a lot of people know that consuming that third donut is not good for your health or good for you, but they are physically unable to stop themselves from doing that. And the reason for this is a lot of hyper-processed foods are becoming engineered to hijack the brain's circuit. And so eating these foods leads to a release in dopamine the same way that consuming a drug will do. And so what happens is when you do this consistently enough, your brain becomes sensitized to associate food with that dopamine hit. So what makes some people more susceptible to getting this dopamine hit and getting addicted to food? Brain studies have shown that people who are obese tend to have fewer dopamine receptors as opposed to people who are not obese. And this is the same pattern as with people who are addicted to drugs. And what this simply means is for obese people, they tend to have fewer dopamine hits when they consume normal amounts of food. So the only time you see their brains shooting a lot of activity due to dopamine is when they start consuming excessive amounts of food or copious amounts of food, as opposed to consuming, say, a normal 800 calorie meal. And so, if the brains of an obese person and a drug addict show the same signals, why don't we treat food addiction the same way that we would treat a drug or an alcohol addiction? And the truth is, it's catching on. There is becoming like support groups like AA for food addicts, as well as other behavioral therapy approaches that are being used to help people who suffer from food addiction. So, this involves things like cognitive behavioral therapy, where an individual is taught to identify triggers for what could make them want to eat a lot more. Like if you're under stress and you feel that the only thing to calm you down is by eating a lot of food, or going to support groups like Overeaters Anonymous, which is essentially the Alcoholics Anonymous for alcoholic addiction treatment. Outside of this psychological approach to combat overeating as an addiction, we're also seeing medications, so like GLP-1s, which are becoming very popular, and also other drugs like Naltrexone, which is used for patients who suffer from drug overdoses, can also be administered to patients to help them combat food addiction or overeating. And so, if you're somebody who feels like you suffer from a food addiction, another thing you can do is to just retrain your environment. Make sure you don't keep addictive foods in your house. If you know that you're going to eat a whole bag of chips, don't have that laying around. And just try to retrain yourself by removing yourself from an environment that will cause you to overeat. It's very important that we note that food can get addictive just as much as drugs or alcohol. And if you're somebody who is suffering from a food addiction, you need to start by understanding that that makes you an addict, the same way that a person taking hard drugs is an addict, and applying the same treatment measures that those people take would be a very good step to helping you overcome this disease.